It is now 8 o'clock. Welcome back. And in case you're joining us now, this is a weekend review on Morning Express and a quick reintroduction of our guests this morning. And to my extreme left, we have Kevin Osido, who is a governance consultant. We also have Mark Bichachi and Professor Oyeri Tumbo, who are also political analysts. And, well, we've looked at Zimbabwe and issues of governance in Africa, and now we want to come back home, where one of the things, of course, that has been taking place over the week and concluded yesterday was the Supreme Court hearing the petitioner and the respondents in regards to the elections held on the 26th of October 2017. And regardless of the ruling, which is expected latest by Monday, is that Kenya still stands at a point where we are on crossroads. We are divided as a nation, and whether we go back to the polls based on the ruling, or Uhuru Kenyatta on the 28th, I believe it should be, is sworn in as the president of Kenya for the second term, there definitely needs to be a conversation had. I'll start with you, Professor Oyeri Tumbo, on what the substance of that conversation should be.
Thank you again, Mike. First and foremost, irrespective of who wins and who loses, all right? What the substance of this discussion should be, which aspects of our national life should we consolidate for collective good? And those are, one, everybody should do their work according to the existing rules and regulations without stepping out of line. That's the first one, the rule of law. The second one is that in a family, quite often, there are misunderstandings, there are quarrels and stuff like that. And I consider the Kenyan state a family. Now, whether, whichever way the court rules, I believe the court is going to rule based on the evidence before it, not on any other influence. Now, once it rules, and it is our institutions, in my opinion at the moment, enjoying considerable credibility, we should be able to begin from there to do the following, engage in social and political healing. In other words, we still, even as much as the court may make a decision, we still must ask for food from each other. We still must give each other a lift. We still must educate each other. So my view is that whatever it's worth, if Uhuru wins, he has a duty to lead even people who are followers of his opponents. So the primary duty for what is going forward, for me, I've always maintained, as we exist right now, the president has his primary duty as the responsibility to make sure Kenya remains one coherent institution. Of course, he's going to face his critics, but his agenda must be to promote justice, peace, and equity.
Is that just Uhuru's responsibility or Raila as well?
No, I said his primary. Raila is not the president. Uhuru,
but as much as
allow me to finish that. Raila is not the president. When you are the head of a family, you must be the one facilitating discussions. You mustn't be the one, all right, who is taking the position that I am here, Utadu. That I think is the... And the second part, Mike, is this. In my opinion, if the president takes conciliatory approaches, Raila has no choice. In my view, he must respond positively to those conciliatory tones.
He could choose not to respond positively or give conditions that are not meetable in the environment. Mark?
There are a number of things that we need to first disabuse in our national conversation. Number one, this idea that an entire tribe is enshrined in a person needs to be removed. We need to get away from this idea that because Prof is from my ethnic community, if he becomes Minister of Finance, then my community is Minister of Finance. That is not the truth. And how do you do that? The first thing that must happen is Kenya must agree, what do we all want in terms of infrastructure, in terms of policy, in terms of national emotion or national narrative. What do I mean? You see, inclusivity is not about positions. It is actually about direction, okay? It is saying that where the country is going, I am okay with that. That is the most important part. Now, how do you get there? Like Prof has said, Uhuru Kenyatta's main role in the next 5 years will be twofold. Number one, to make sure that these 5 years are as corruption-free as possible. That's one.
If he's...
yes, if he's confirmed. The second part, which is very, very critical for him, he must take on the issues that Raila Odinga stands for. He must represent those issues, because you may disagree with the person, Raila, but you have to agree with what his people are agitating for. What are they agitating for? Clear processes, corruption-less, and things like that. That has got to become an issue for the president as well. Because the issue is that if the issues of the people who are on the opposition come on the agenda of the people who are in power, then you begin to heal the nation. Exclusivity is not about individuals. It is about what I feel my nation should be. And if you don't represent that, I will forever be angry at you. Thirdly, and this becomes very important, the conversation has to be had about what next for Kenya, not who next for Kenya come 2022. There has to be that conversation where if Uhuru again is confirmed, he has to talk about his vision for Kenya when he is not in power. It needs to be a very critical conversation, because if he can address those issues in this term, then 2022 is less volatile. Third and my last point on this is that the person of Raila Odinga, okay, in as much as he's never been president, he needs to seriously consider the question of his succession. Part of the tension that we have is people are looking at him and saying, wait a minute, this guy is growing old. Is he our last chance? Raila needs to groom that hope that people have placed in him and be able to place it on someone else. I'm not saying he doesn't have the right to run in 2022. What I'm simply saying is he needs to create a pathway for his supporters to feel like the hope that they've vested in him can be carried beyond his person. That is what needs to happen.
Wow. Kevin, your thoughts on the conversation Kenya should be having, and possibly who should lead this conversation? So far, I've heard the two gentlemen say that the president has a huge responsibility. However, the opposition leader, Raila Odinga, even if Uhuru was sworn in as president, has a critical mass, a constituency that he appeals to. And it cannot purely be the president's responsibility, although he may have a bigger responsibility given by position of office, not person, by position of office, to have that responsibility. But your thoughts?
Mike, in my view, all this will change at some point. Why do I say this? Out of 19 million registered voters, 5.5 plus of them were new voters, people who just graduated from university or people who just transited into age 18. And why this will change is because if you look at the political development processes of this country, there have been much more of a discussion around two families, the Odinga family and the Kenyatta family. Now, this over time will change, and I think 2022 is going to be that epicenter of change and the epitome of change of narratives and discussions insofar as what politics, leadership, and governance mean for this country. A politician thinks about the next election, and the leader thinks about the next generation. The 5.5 plus million Kenyans will represent what is going to happen beyond 2022 in the next election. But much more in addition to that is that our politics has been a discussion around elections. And that's what we were more or less saying earlier on when we were having this discussion around Africa. Can there be a point where people go to vote and they still are given an opportunity and a chance to want to be part of that process? And I think for our case in Kenya, the Supreme Court then presents that opportunity that any Kenyan can go and present a petition. But again, you note that what is happening in the court is judges and the lawyers are saying, If you didn't participate in this process, what stakes do you have? You did not vote, you didn't run as a candidate. Why are you coming to have these questions? You know that we had this friend of mine who went and said, Mr. Chief Justice, I am a voter who just went and voted, and I have issues around this election.
Who will listen to me?
Yeah, where do you want me to? Those are questions that really this process is giving us an opportunity. And what the Chief Justice said was, you know what, my fellow Kenyan, we are 19 million voters. If we gave each and every person an opportunity to come here and to be heard, we'd sit here for 24 years, which is true. But also, in my view, I thought it was much more of a closed door for people like myself and others who would have had issues with the process. But what this therefore presents to me is what, in addition to what my other colleagues have said, is Raila and Uhuru Kenyatta. In all these processes, I think the president, and if his election is sustained by the Supreme Court, has a lot of work to do. Because the president sits at what is called the presidency. And by our constitution, the presidency is a symbol of national unity.
All right.
And he has to move to that point of really trying to bring together this country until that point when, like Prof. and Mark said, the questions and the issues that Raila and his team are raising. Mike, county assemblies are ratifying people's assemblies. This is serious for devolution. It means something that we need to really have a discussion around. But as I always say, we missed the point in 2007 when we had this Kenya National Dialogue Reconciliation process. And God, being a faithful God, I think is given us a second chance that in 2017, 10 years down the line, we can still get to a table and say,
all right, and I want to bring in, as Prof, as you come in, I want to bring in the aspect of speaking to Kenyans, because here we are, and as much as we do not want to downplay the influence and power that our political leaders have, the Constitution starts by saying that power is with the people. However, we seem to give that power to the politicians regardless of the fact that it's evident sometimes they balkanize and literally polarize us to a point where we fight each other. What responsibility do we have as Kenyans, regardless of the ruling of the Supreme Court, whether we go back to the polls or not, whether Raila becomes president or Uhuru Kenyatta becomes president? Surely we must have a responsibility that we can talk here as Kenyans and say this is something that we have determined we shall do regardless of what happens at the top.
Now, that's a very difficult question, Mike. Very difficult in the sense that in our country, the politician, once, whether it is at the local level or at the national level, once he's been elected, he or she is elevated to a demigod. Immediately, the status of that person changes, irrespective of what I'm going to say next. What needs to change in our country is not that there will be young people voting, is the thinking. The thinking, for example, in this country, the politicians have glorified and entrenched corruption. Now, the young people developing, getting into positions of participation, seem to believe strongly that corruption is a good thing. Then there is a group that believes strongly that tribalism is a good thing. In fact, the other day, some young people confronted me, and I was embarrassed, actually. The issue was, if tribalism is so bad, how can it be bad when it gives people power? It gives people resources, jobs. It gives people jobs, and you keep on telling us it is bad. How come you want us to abandon it when it has enabled you guys to flourish? All right? Now, so what requires to change is the paradigm, the thinking, the communication. In other words, what do we talk about? How do we talk about it? And with whom do we talk about it? One of the indicators, in my view, you know, I believe very strongly that in my opinion, these guys we call political leaders. In my opinion, they are business leaders. They are leading their own business entities. In other words, they are using the political system to promote their own business entities. And I want to say here that going forward, if the president and the leader of the opposition can attempt to change the narrative in order to empower the next generation for example, the group that is in their 20s and 30s right now, they're itching for action. They're itching for participation. They're itching for positions. Now, if we do not change the narrative to allow these people to participate on merit, so the narrative that needs to be made at our national level is that meritocracy supersedes even the law. In other words, you can make a law, but if you give it to a fool, he'll mess up the system.
The system.
Yeah.
All right, Mark, your thoughts on what conversation we as Kenyans should be having, even if we are to try, I don't know if it's possible, disconnect the political class so that should they even tell us to go and fight, we'll tell them, no, we're not going to fight this fight between ourselves. Let's do this in court or within the confines of the law.
I've argued before that Kenya's problem is a moral problem. Actually, its problem is we lack morals. What do I mean by we lack morals? We have an election cycle where a returning officer can refuse to sign where it is written, sign here. Okay? We live in a country where a politician can take money, and you know, this is what we say, 3 billion has disappeared to where? You understand? So we've come to a point where we have elected leaders who have the gall to stand and insult each other in names that I cannot repeat in front of my children or even in this sitting. And yet we call them leaders. Here's the problem. It is like if the Kenya Bureau of Standards decided that a meter is this long. Okay? So basically everything that is longer than this is a meter and above. And this is the problem. We have such a low expectation of our leaders that now when we want to choose them as leaders, we don't even consider merit, as Prof has said. So the question really that Kenya needs to address is, what is our moral value? If my morality is so low that I'm willing to insult another Kenyan based on their tribe, okay, that is the height of madness, because there's nothing about the content of their character that I am judging. It is simply because they come from a particular region. And this is really what our problem is. And this morality issue starts from primary school. 2 years ago, we had a huge fight in schools because parents were actually fighting for the opportunity to rig an exam for our children. Are we mad as a nation that you want to get a fake document for your child that says they passed an exam as though it will change their IQ? Surely. So the problem with this country is we take on these characters and we give it to them, to our kids when they're in class 8, when they're in form 4. And now we expect that when they're going to vote different. And because our leaders are therefore amoral, because we don't have any, we have issues. Now, what is the cure? There are two cures. The cure, number one, is we thank God that, number one, we have a sitting president who's saying he will hand over peacefully in 2022. Very important. Why? Because generally as transitions happen, the person coming next, even in your chama, always says, I will improve. So that's the important part. The second part that is very, very critical is now as a nation, as my brother said, we've come into a point where we must have the difficult conversations that we previously sweep under the rug, under the tag, let's just accept. Okay? Now we have an opportunity to discuss, and this is the key issue, not to discuss individuals getting into office, but what those offices will do for us. That is a conversation that we need. What will that office called presidency do for me? What will that office called governorship do for me? I read in the papers that the county of Kisumu had 15 hidden bank accounts. 15. How many times did you have to plan to rob us for you to have 15 fake bank accounts? And this is the issue. It is a moral problem. And the issue is, it's not a NASA problem. It is not a Jubilee problem. It is a Kenyan problem. And those are the conversations we need to have.
Mike, I was going to add here, I think he's made a very useful contribution. What I want to add here is that collectively, can we make ourselves guardians of our moral values?
Yes.
For example, to me, society perceives that religious organizations are the custodians of our morals. Now, it's very difficult for them at the moment to carry out that function because they have become politically religious, you know, if that was to be found. In other words, instead of them being custodians of our moral values, they have somehow got themselves entangled in the fabric of deceit.
Yes.
Now, so that our national practice on an everyday basis, you hear a person being called smart because he's been able to steal 50 billion from an institution. That, you know, huyu ni mwanaume. That's the language you hear being used. So really, the bottom line in all this, in attempting to establish a new dialogue for the nation, for individuals, dialogue between individuals and the state, individuals among themselves, against their relative to their local governing authorities, is extremely important for us to find a way, in my opinion, for future discussions. To find a way, you need to frame future dialogue around raising the moral values of our nation at personal and at the national level. Now, there is a saying, Mike, that if you are unable to manage yourself as an individual, it's highly unlikely
that you'll
manage anything else.
Anything else. All right, Kevin, I want us to wind up because we're out of time, and possibly your closing remarks as we look at the events that has taken place the past week and what we possibly should project. Remembering again, on Monday is when we're expecting the Supreme Court ruling to be given, and of course that's going to throw us back into some kind of political cycle, whether it is the swearing in of Uhuru Kenyatta or it's going to be us going back to the ballot.
Ceteris paribus, again, all factors remaining constant, I believe that the way forward should be about this country. Which Kenya are we talking about? What Kenya do we want? And I think that our history has catapulted us to that point where we actually know the kind of Kenya that you want. But I can imagine how difficult it is to get the Kenya that you want. And as we continue to even push for this dialogue, I also recognize how confusion is beginning to creep in, because the religious leaders that have for a long time been given that moral stick to be able to churn this country, and despite the fact that our Vision 2030 also has a pillar that is called the social pillar that then is supposed to guide the country towards Article 10 of the Constitution of National Values and Principles, yet is not happening. But the religious leaders are saying we need to get to a point where we can be able to bring back prime ministers, two executive prime ministers, and that kind of discussion. How that is going to really churn out and come up is going to determine, in my view, how far we move. But I also can imagine how difficult it is, especially for the president and the former prime minister, because one of the programs, Mike, that we run where I serve, which is County Governance Watch, is called Marching Through Mentorship. And so we try to bring in progressive and people who've made it from different counties to be able to visit schools and just to talk. And one thing that we tried some time back in a school was to bring in parents of the pupils of that particular school. We were shocked because at how dialogue and just the ability to speak to each other can be difficult, because there's this lady who for a long time was not talking to the parents. And when we asked her why this was happening, because even on that same day, she couldn't even go to say hello to the father, neither to the mom. And we got in and began conversations around what is happening, and we were so surprised when at some point the family organized for a pastor to come and intervene, and the parents were saying, she is the problem. And when the lady was asked what is the issue, she told the pastor, ask them what the issue is. The long and short of it is, the lady said, when I began to experience my menses, it was neither my mom nor my dad who bought me my first item to use. It was the driver. How did the driver know? Because there was blood in the car. And the lady didn't know what this really meant. So they didn't proceed to school. They went to a supermarket, and it's the driver who began taking this lady through the process of this is what you use, this is why it is happening. So looking at Kenya, because that family to me presented the serious issues that we deal with as a country. And so when the father of the household is supposed to be taking lead, and that leadership is not being provided for, I think that that is where now the confusion that we are seeing in this country is beginning to creep in. So mine is, regardless of the ruling of the Supreme Court, I think the discussion should be around how do we move Kenya forward? And from where I sit, I think they are both parties are raising very serious questions of strengthening institutions and of moving the country forward, which we need to pick up.
Mark, your closing comments, very briefly.
Kenya is at a very good time in its history. It's a good time because we get a chance to craft our nation. And crafting our nation is building homegrown solutions that we can all believe in. And the thing is, and there's a statement that I want to remove, it is politically correct to say it, but it is wrong to say it, where the winner
takes it all,
and the loser has their say. It should not be like that. It should actually that the winner takes the opportunity to address the loser and find out, not the loser Raila, the people Raila represents. And this is key for me, that these people he represents, why didn't they vote for me? That is the answer, the question that Jubilee must answer. They must constantly make it their focus to answer that question. Why didn't you vote for me, and how can I bring myself to that point where you can vote for me because I represent what the change that you really wanted? That's what Kenya needs.
All right.
Actually, I agree entirely with Mark, because really what Raila represents, Jubilee makes an effort to vilify Raila as a person. But Raila has people almost equal in number.
Support base.
Yeah. Support base that is as good as that of Jubilee. So, and this is, to me, is the difficult part. When are we going to switch our focus from Raila the Luo to Raila the Kenyan? And when are we going to switch the discussion from Uhuru the Kikuyu to Uhuru the national leader? Yes. You know, this is the prison we are in. So to get out of this, in my view, all of us, particularly the youth who have a major stake going forward, should begin dialogue at their personal level, discussing the things that matter to them. And when now the national politician comes and makes his statement, they should be able to say, we understand what you are saying, but we do not agree. Now, this is really the point of departure. Unless this begins to happen, the old dialogue will overshadow everything else. So going forward, in my view, it is not about Raila, it is not about Uhuru, it is not about Kikuyus, it's not about Luos, it is about Kenyan. The only thing we have in common, and we have voluntarily subscribed, is our ID card. Yes. We have subscribed to it.
Absolutely.
We have subscribed to it. We cannot then begin saying there is no second primary ethnic ID card. We just have one ID card.
Which belongs to Kenya.
Which belongs to Kenya.
All right, gentlemen,
that's where
we'll have to wind up right there. Thank you very much.
So we can't secede.
Kevin Osido, Mark Bichachi, and Professor Eri Tumbo, thank you for joining us this morning as we look at our week in review. It's now 27 minutes after 8. We're going to take a short break, but do stay with us right here on KTN News. We've got more coming.